The characteristic north wind and the uncharacteristically blazing afternoon sun greeted her outside, and Ludmilla shifted in her mantle to part the front slightly. The magically induced clear skies had the side effect of turning the flooded valley significantly warmer and more humid for the spring months, and she started to wonder if maintaining such perfect weather indefinitely would produce adverse effects over the land. In addition to the accelerated growth of all manner of crops and wild vegetation, the insects were out in force far in advance of when they would usually appear in their summer swarms. Skirting around a cloud of bugs that hovered over the lane, she hoped that the conditions wouldn't become horrific by the end of the season. The normally muddy stretches of village paths, too, were caked and dry. The song of the forge sounded dimly in the air as she made her way down to the flats where the 2 tents with their small campfire stood against the backdrop of harvested timber. Though Ludmilla had noted more on her way into the harbor, only 2 men and a woman now tended to the fire. As far as she knew, they had not really done anything beyond collecting the scraps of cloth for their makeshift shelters and bits of wood for the fire. How or where they procured food and other supplies was unknown, though she suspected that they were poaching from the river and her surrounding lands. The 3 rose to their feet upon registering her approach. One of the men pulled a thick staff from the tent behind them. All wore suspicious frowns as she came forward, and the man without the staff spoke. "Don't come no closer," he said. "We've had it up to here with you people coming to gawk at us like some sideshow." The crunch of boots on gravel ceased as Ludmilla stopped a fair distance away from the trio. Despite Amelia's protests, she had decided to come out plainly dressed, without an escort or any indication of who she was. She sensed that they were no stronger than most of the villagers on the way in, and the manner in which the migrants on the trip to Warden'svale opened up to who they thought was a future fellow villager encouraged her to find out why these 3 had arrived on their own in a similar fashion. The rude reception was entirely unexpected, and she glanced up to count the bone vultures circling in the skies nearby. Were they mistreated in some fashion by the villagers before she had arrived? Or maybe they were put off by Nonna, though Ludmilla had not ever actually received any complaints about the elder lich from anyone in all of her time here. "Why are you here?" Ludmilla asked. The man looked to his companions before replying with a scoff. "Why are we here? We moved here's what. All of the migrants here come by way of the river," Ludmilla said, "by the invitation of the local lord." "Invitation?" he sneered. "Lords don't go inviting no one. We're freedmen, you know. We ain't some stupid serfs being shipped in on a boat. We can go wherever we please. Heard there's plenty of land so we'll be staking a claim when we find us a nice batch, eh?" The strange mess of twisted understanding that came out of the man's mouth struck Ludmilla silent for a moment. It took a conscious effort to keep a straight face. "I think you are confused about how things work," she explained. "This land is a fief managed by the local administration." The 3 only offered her blank looks over the fire in response. "A noble house rules these lands. It is someone's property," Ludmilla explained. "It is not just some piece of unclaimed wilderness that you can decide to settle without permission." "Nah, you're the one that's confused," the man crinkled his nose at her. "This here's the Sorceress Kingdom now, and we're its citizens. No noble's gonna give us a hard time, just ask Whole Facet." "What does Facet have to do with this?" The man looked to his companions again and gave a short bark of a laugh. Now, looks like these swampicks really do live underground," he said, and the 2 others chuckled. "The Sorceress Kingdom don't like it when you mess with its citizens. They found out what Count Facet was up to and now he ain't there no more. If Lord here messes with us, they'll send someone out to off him as well." "You're from Facet County?" She didn't think it was possible for Lady Aura to miss anyone in their sweep of the territory. "No, crossed next door," he said. "Place was being turned upside down, some new guy got put in charge. Made ourselves scarce, not like it was any good there anyways. Now we'll get some nice land to ourselves, then we'll be the lords and no one'll tell us what to do." Ludmilla was at a loss as to what she could say. Not only was the man entirely oblivious to how the lands were managed, he had also concocted some sort of nonsensical worldview that only served to fuel his cocksure manner. "Didn't I tell you we don't like being stared at?" The man scowled as Ludmilla stood pondering, and the man with the quarterstaff stepped forward threateningly. "If ya ain't got anything for us, get the hell out of our faces." Ludmilla turned around and walked off back the way she came. The loud sound of someone clearing his throat caused her to glance over her shoulder, and the man spat in an exaggerated way into the campfire. "Stupid bog bitch," he said, "come out all this way for nothing." She turned her head back to face forward. On a whim, she focused her senses. An unmistakable sensation emanated from the group behind her, a lighter feeling than what she had perceived while she tracked down her quarry in Facet County, indicating that they were indeed undesirable elements, though nowhere near as bad. They had not run afoul of any laws in her territory, either, so she could not act. Well, she technically had the right, but it would be like she was lashing out against the group simply for being rude to a stranger. Releasing the ability, she calmed herself down. At first, once she had explored its use in helping to clear out Facet County, she thought it would make her life much easier when it came to sifting out problematic elements in the realm. After testing it several times after returning from the West, however, she discovered that, while it helped her track down what might be problems within the greater scope of order in the Sorcerer's Kingdom, the severity gauged had many degrees and never provided any insight as to why such elements existed. The sense associated with specific individuals could vanish the next day without any sort of intervention, and trying to do something about the problems she encountered sometimes actually made things worse. It could mean anything from a lack of direction in the general populace to individual swells of emotion manifesting into a temporary disposition that would shortly dissipate into nothing the next day. Findings that turned out to be rebellion, severe crime or heavy corruption were practically non-existent, at least in the places where she had been. In the end, the most use she could normally make out of her ability was the loose idea of whether things were going in the right direction or not, and employing it in crowded places like Irantal overwhelmed her entirely. From the brief period that she had tried while she was in the city, though, nothing appeared to be anywhere near the severity that she experienced in Facet County. Re-entering the manor hall, she found that Nonna and Amelia were still inside. "Was there something that we missed, my lady?" Amelia asked, glancing around the small space that was the manor. "No," Ludmilla replied, "I just returned from speaking with the group that pitched those tents out on the flats." "Already? They didn't attack you or anything, did they?" The bunch of them seemed quite dubious, even from a distance. "No, they didn't go so far as to physically attack me," Ludmilla said. "Nonna, have them put on the next ship out, tie them up if necessary." "What are they to be charged with?" The elder lich opened her book and looked at her. "If you are required to provide a charge to the administration, then I suppose that they are technically trespassing on my territory. That isn't the reason why I am sending them away though. I simply don't wish for people with the sort of behavior that they demonstrated living in my fief. The last thing I want is their spitefully using a charge laid against them as the basis for malicious rumors about my territory not accepting immigrants. Well, they may end up doing it anyway, but I'm not about to give them any ideas." Ludmilla put her mantle aside, accepting a fresh cup of tea offered by Amelia as the scratching of Nonna's pen filled the silence. "Let the captain know that they're to be delivered to Corlin Harbor. I'll have to warn Clara about them as well." "Should they be detained until then?" Nonna asked. "Not unless they look like they're about to go somewhere." Ludmilla pointed in the general direction of the flats. "Set a bone vulture to specifically watch over them from overhead. I don't care if they loiter around outside without bothering anyone, but I want them out." "You haven't even invited me in yet," a light voice chimed from the door. "Never mind throwing me out. I think I'm hurt." Nonna bowed in front of her and Ludmilla spun around, curtsying deeply towards the narrow doorway as soon as she confirmed the owner of the new voice. "I am dreadfully sorry," she cried in a horrified voice. "My words were meant for some other people. You are, of course, always welcome in my home, Lady Sholtier." The lightly frilled hem of Lady Sholtier's black ballroom gown filled her downcast gaze as her liege stepped over the threshold of the manor. Ludmilla was made painfully aware of the dust from the road that she had just tracked in being swept up by the exquisite and incalculably valuable dress. "You may raise your heads." With a bit of hesitation, Ludmilla rose to face Lady Sholtier. Her silhouette filled the entryway, and her glowing crimson eyes were laid upon her in some bemusement. "While it's fun to find opportunities to tease you," she said with a small smile, "your skill at groveling is decidedly lacking. I suppose I shall have to find other ways to derive my pleasure from you, Lady Zaradnik. So what was this about throwing people out?" Ludmilla guided Lady Sholtier to the rear of her home, taking a seat across the small dining table from her. Amelia attended to them near the table. "Do you take tea, my lady?" Ludmilla asked. "I can drink tea, yes," Lady Shiltier replied. Amelia turned away to prepare what little hospitality they had to offer as Ludmilla explained what had occurred. "The capital has bylaws that address this sort of behavior," Lady Shiltier noted. "Do they not exist in your fief as well?" "Not as such, no," Ludmilla answered. "Laws against rowdy and belligerent behavior short of inflicting grievous injury and committing murder have never existed in Warden's Vale. To be frank, my lady, it has always been a place where the people are rough, rowdy and rude, but not that kind of rude. My people knew where the boundaries of respect were drawn, so there was never any need for such measures." Populations in territories charged with the defense of the realm had a distinct culture of their own, which stemmed from their principal duties. Unlike inland territories that generally had docile tendencies encouraged in their populations, frontier regions had a martial culture that harnessed aggression and the skills required to defend their homes. Children and adults alike were allowed to wrestle, roughhouse and fight and, in doing so, also developed a code of behavior that understood where the lines of such conduct lay. Dealing with militant individuals from the inland territories was always a vaguely annoying thing. Be they a fresh member of the militia or an adventurer, it was like interacting with people that only recently came into ownership of a weapon and didn't know how and when it was to be used, or what it could do. From what she had seen, brawls and domestic conflicts in the city were also like this. One had to break up altercations because the people involved often fought without reserve. They just acted like their lives were being threatened, or acted with deadly intent, even over ridiculously minor things. Though the inland nobles seemed to equate the borderlands with brutal militancy and savage conduct, the populations of border territories might consider inlanders undisciplined and soft. "Well, these people are here now," Lady Shiltier looked up at her, "and your new migrants are not the same villagers that you grew up with." "It is as you say, my lady," Ludmilla admitted. "Even so, I was hoping to carry my own culture forward with the new migrants. They do not seem to share the same proud, independent spirit of my people, and it seems that they are floundering about when left to their own devices. Whether I can instill them with the same ideals as before, I am uncertain, but at the least I would like to see roughly the same freedoms enjoyed." "Then I suppose we will see where your path leads you," Lady Shiltier said after taking a sip out of the cup of tea laid before her. "I have no worries about you personally, but keep in mind that you are a rarity amongst your kind. Your experiences beyond the borders of your fief should have provided you with ample evidence of that." "Thank you, my lady," Ludmilla lowered her head. "I will keep that well in mind. So what is it that brings you personally all the way to my humble fief?" "Those frost dragons are finally behaving properly for the capital's grand opening, so I came over here to see what was going on. I was curious about the demi-human intrusion that was reported, but I suppose all that's left of it is standing outside of your door." "There have been no further incidents beyond the first one, my lady," Ludmilla said. "Unfortunately, I have no way of knowing why they even appeared." "Is there even a point to knowing this?" Lady Shiltier looked at her curiously. "Your role as a frontier noble was always to keep intruders out, yes? The result here seems a satisfactory conclusion." "I suppose when dealing from a position of power that might be the case, my lady," Ludmilla said. "I suppose it is a vestige of our ways of thinking when House Saradnik had limited strength and numbers. You are correct that our duty was to keep the borders as clear of hostile intruders as possible, but it rarely resorted to facing our neighbors directly in combat. When you only have 100 or so villagers and there are potentially thousands of demi-humans in the wilderness nearby, understanding when deterrence is sufficient and when force is required is essential." Lady Shiltier nursed her drink in both hands, frowning down at the surface of the table. It was probably not something she would have to consider. Her liege was an extraordinarily powerful cleric, and leveling entire towns with a single spell was well within her capabilities. "Then, what were you hoping to discover?" Lady Shiltier asked. "No two demi-human species are the same," Ludmilla answered, "and the squire zombie outside of the door is of one that I have never seen before. As imposing as it appears, it is no guarantee of its actual behavior. Some vicious-looking demi-humans are perfectly benign, while the opposite is true for others. If it was a part of an envoy, and a series of misunderstandings is in progress, it could very well culminate into a full-scale reprisal. Even the last time someone fought with the undead here, it was a human who thought he was saving me from them." How often do demi-humans send you envoys? Most would only resort to diplomacy if they respect the other side's strength, or if dire circumstances arise that force them into it. Around here, it is extraordinarily rare, as we keep our borders well defined. The theocracy is not very far away, either, so the local demi-humans tend to stay away from humans, and understand that human reprisals are extraordinarily deadly. Well, if it's any comfort, they wouldn't get very far even if they did come by. Lady Sheltier took another sip of tea. The reports on the local demi-human tribes during our initial sweeps over the area indicated no substantial threats. Please forgive my saying so, my lady, but that is not the point. I still consider it imperative to understand as much as is possible, to have the most complete picture of the situation so that I may make sound judgments. Lady Sheltier looked up from the table, and Ludmilla shifted slightly under the scrutiny of her gaze. Your outlook is genuinely surprising, Lady Sheltier said, and not only because of your apparent duty to exterminate invaders. Do the teachings of your gods also not promote such behavior? The faith of the 6 great gods does promote the agenda of humanity first and foremost. It is a religion for humans, after all. The faithful in the theocracy are reported to be as zealous as you suggest, but in Riestais and the other northern human nations, our faith is in the minority and we have a degree of temperance when it comes to such things by necessity. The faithful inland are even far more mild, from what I have seen. If anything, frontier populations may be the most extreme in their outlook beyond the borders of our neighbor to the south, as we do experience periodic hostilities with non-human races. I think your definition of extreme differs slightly from mine. Perhaps, Ludmilla smiled slightly, but my desire for information is not the product of some benevolent and optimistic outlook, it is to make the best decisions possible in any given situation. If that decision happens to be the extermination of hostile invaders, then the understanding that I have developed will help me come up with the best ways by which to do so. Yes, I suppose that's more like you. Lady Sheltier's eyes gleamed. If that's the case, then maybe you should resurrect the fellow outside and ask directly. You would do this, my lady? No, her liege's lips turned down in a small frown. The budget that has been allocated to me is scarce enough as it is. I swear Albedo is giving me a hard time on purpose. Speaking of which, this brings me to another reason I came to visit you. Lady Sheltier turned her head to the figure standing nearby in the hall. Nonna, yes? It is an honor that Lady Sheltier would remember this one's designation, the Elder Lich bowed. Return to your duties, she told the Elder Lich. You do not need to be here. Nonna once again bowed respectfully before leaving the manor. After the door shut quietly, Lady Sheltier turned her attention back to Ludmilla. Now where was I? Yes, the reason why I came. It wasn't to investigate the report of intrusion, my lady, Ludmilla asked. I suppose that was something like a reasonable excuse, Lady Sheltier answered. I have enlisted you to aid me in my new duties. It is as good a time as any to begin. Lady Sheltier's lips parted to speak again, then she stopped and scanned the room carefully. Silence. The dim sounds of the village leaking through the thin walls of the manor hall abruptly ceased, leaving an eerie stillness in the air. In the corner of her vision, Ludmilla saw Amelia glance about nervously. Going by the still audible shuffle of her maid's feet, it seemed that Lady Sheltier had cast the same enchantment from the night she had visited Ludmilla's solar in Rantel. My lady. All appraisal magic item. Taking one last look around the room, Lady Sheltier nodded in satisfaction before answering. I doubt you've forgotten that your attaché is one of Albedo's creatures, she said. Since the Prime Minister seemingly wishes to abandon me to my own devices in the pursuit of my task, then I will keep her big nose out of my matters entirely. Do keep this in mind, Ludmilla, she's been gleaning the fruit of your own efforts as well. I understand, my lady, Ludmilla replied. I will keep information regarding this separate from my other work. Will we be headed somewhere later? If so, I'd like to ask for some time. I've not completely caught up to all of my duties here. It should take another day or two provided nothing unexpected occurs that pushes things back. We'll just be conducting an overview today. Lady Sheltier dismissed her concerns with an absent wave of her hand. There are also several other things. I believe you mentioned wanting to discuss something to do with our contract the last time we parted. Yes, that's right, my lady, Ludmilla nodded. I need to discuss my taxes with you. The taxes of the Sorceress Kingdom should go to the Sorcerer King, should they not? As far as I know, the tax laws have not been changed. Nobles have the right to collect revenues from their holdings independently, and their liege similarly collects revenues from their vassals in addition to what is garnered from the holdings that they administer directly. Land taxes are of course separate from customs duties, tolls, fines and such, but, as you are my liege, you are who receives my taxes. Is this not something you normally practice? It's not, Lady Shaltia said. We don't pay taxes to His Majesty, though there have been occasions where we've offered personal tributes to him. His Majesty even offered to provide us with a salary at one point, but since all of our needs are provided by him in the first place, one thing led to another and the notion was abandoned. I've heard of subsidies and stipends being provided to fund various projects or address security concerns, my lady, but I've never heard of vassals being compensated simply for being vassals. Ludmilla wondered what sort of salary Lady Shaltia would command. Surely it was some fabulous amount, and the proceeds would go into something equally so. Then what would you do with the taxes I paid you? Ludmilla asked. There's at least one thing I would like to do. How many years of taxes do you think it would take to come up with 1 billion gold coins? Ludmilla mouthed the amount silently while Lady Shaltia looked on in expectation. What in the world would one do with so much currency? More to the point, did so much coinage even exist? Well, I don't expect prices for commodities produced by undead labor to maintain their current levels, but even so I don't think that's something my domain could produce in my entire lifetime. But your descendants will serve me as well, yes? I do indeed desire this to be the case, my lady, but I've no confidence in making such long-range economic projections. That's a shame. I suppose that in the end the full amount would go to His Majesty, though, every little bit counts, yes? The unfathomable nature of the Sorceress Kingdom once again made itself plainly clear to Ludmilla. Even the plans that she had wrought for her domain and its resulting productivity seemed less than a mote in comparison. She needed to find some way for her contributions to have more meaning than simply being an indistinguishable drop in an ocean. You mentioned some budgetary constraints and the Prime Minister. What was that about? Yes, Lady Shaltia said. As you know, the Ministry of Transportation is establishing an aerial transportation network, using the Frost Dragons as the backbone for the project. The Prime Minister has allocated, well, nothing to the project, so I've been using my own resources for it. The Prime Minister has allocated none of the nation's budget to a national project? That doesn't make much sense. To be honest, I technically do have everything needed to make things run, which is ultimately His Majesty's anyways. The reasoning should be somewhere along those lines. If that's the reasoning, then perhaps the Prime Minister considered the matter of my taxes as well. Regardless, I believe it would be a productive way to put the resources to use. Once we've developed this network into a workable form, the revenues from the nation's effective monopoly over aerial transportation will be well worth the investment. The revenues? Lady Shaltia tilted her head curiously. Even transporting goods over land has associated costs, yes? My vessel needs to be maintained, plus I need to pay harbor fees and such. Then I have to hire a wagon to transport my goods from the harbor to the city for sale. I'm not sure how much the Frost Dragons cost to maintain, but we'll have to balance the service's expenses, at least. Lady Shaltia tilted her head the other way, and Ludmilla held her words in check. Considering what Lady Shaltia had said about the arrangement of her own resources, she might have been approaching the challenge from an entirely different angle. Apologies, my lady, I've only been considering things from my own limited understanding, Ludmilla said. Rather than getting ahead of myself, I should have made sure that I was on the same page first. We should start from the beginning to avoid misunderstandings. I agree, Lady Shaltia said. I've made a great study of these Frost Dragons in the past few weeks, and I believe I have come up with a number of ideas to best put them to use. Let's see. Lady Shaltia's voice trailed off as she reached into a hole in the air in front of her. Ludmilla and Amelia watched as her arm made rummaging motions as she muttered to herself. No, not that one. It should be somewhere around here. I thought I left that at home. Oops, I forgot to turn this off. Here it is. Her hand reappeared, holding a light blue notepad with an expensive-looking pen clipped onto it. After she placed the item on the table between them, her gown shimmered briefly before being replaced by an entirely different outfit. Ludmilla could only see the portion of it above the table. Her liege now wore a white silken blouse with long sleeves, a rich crimson tie at her collar. Over the blouse was a sleeveless black vest with grey pinstripes, fastened by 3 large, glistening, buttons. Oval half-rimmed spectacles with dark frames appeared on her face, while the bow and bonnet on her head disappeared, releasing the lustrous waves of her silver hair to spill over her shoulders and down her back. Lady Sheltier reached up to loosen the tie and unbuttoned her collar to expose the slender lines of her pale neck and collarbone. A moment passed before a small furrow appeared on her brow and a large clip appeared in one hand, a brush in the other. "I guess the quick swap crystal in the clip won't work so conveniently," she murmured, then looked towards her. "Fix my hair, Ludmilla." Ludmilla stared blankly after the sudden request, blinking several times. "Noble women here are trained to be ladies-in-waiting, yes?" Lady Sheltier asked as she pulled out a ghostly-looking hairband. "Yes, my lady," Ludmilla replied. "Just one moment." She stepped away to make sure her hands were clean, wondering how things had gone from planning an aerial transportation network to arranging her lady's hair. Returning to stand behind Lady Sheltier, she knelt down and held out her hands, clasping and unclasping her fingers nervously. Amelia had surreptitiously inched over to closely watch. Somehow the entire affair had become a trial. "How would you like your hair arranged, my lady?" She forced out a calm and even voice. "Just keeping it up and off the floor is fine," Lady Sheltier replied lightly. "There's no need to be so nervous." "Is this invisible?" Ludmilla asked as she picked up the strange hairband. "Yes, it's an invisible hairband. Usually my vampire brides deactivate the invisibility before using it, but I suppose that's not a problem for you." Even Lady Sheltier's hair ties were magic items. Ludmilla hoped she didn't accidentally break anything. The first challenge Ludmilla thought she would have was confusion over which hair was currently her hair, but her concerns eased as she was able to accurately work with the hair that was actually there. Her shoulders loosened, and her stiff movements grew more fluid. The light aroma of her lady's sweet, cinnamon perfume drifted up with each stroke of the brush. It was only after Lady Sheltier's hair had taken a soft sheen in the light of the lamp overhead that she gathered it into her hands, twisting it up into a large bun over the nape of her neck and fastening it with the clip. Stepping from one side to the other, she teased out strands to lightly frame her face with lazy curls that fell in front of her shoulders. Ludmilla stepped back and waited anxiously while Lady Sheltier examined her work with an ornate hand mirror produced from somewhere. She turned her head this way and that, tilting both her head and the mirror in several angles before a hole opened up in the air again and she put the mirror and the brush away. "This is quite nice," she smiled. "It seems that you're adept at organizing all sorts of things." "You honor me, my lady," Ludmilla said. "I suppose I should be thankful to Clara for dragging me into these things all the time. Speaking of which, Clara and the others would help greatly in envisioning this transportation network, Leanne, especially. Their background as merchant houses would be an advantage here. Should I see about enlisting their talents as well?" As tempting as this might be, Lady Sheltier replied, "They still report directly to Albedo as His Majesty's direct vassals, so I'll not risk their direct participation. Perhaps in the future I will have the confidence that I can bring them in under me as well, but, for the time being, I dare not request more than what His Majesty has already provided me. Our work will have to earn recognition beyond the shadow of a doubt if you wish to have your friends join you. The fact that is possible is encouraging, my lady. I look forward to our future success." "Oh my," filled with conviction now, "aren't we? Well, they are my friends, so yes. I would very much like to be able to work more closely with them." "Friends, Lady Sheltier repeated absently. "Well, that will most likely be far in the future. Now that we're in the spirit of things, let's see what you can make out of my notes." Ludmilla reached out and took the light blue notepad in her hands, flipping open the cover. Within were notes in some language that she had never seen before. Continuing to flip through page after page, she saw a multitude of diagrams, maps and dense blocks of the same elegant, yet unknown, text throughout. After her reaction to the initial report on Facet County, Ludmilla thought her liege might be averse to lengthy and meticulous documentation, but going through her notes it seemed like it might not be the case. "I'm sorry, my lady," she said as she looked back up, "I'm unable to read this. What are you doing?" In front of her, Lady Shiltier was holding a dark green notepad, writing something within. "Taking notes," she said. "On what?" Ludmilla wondered. Anyways, if you'd be so kind as to provide a translation, I'll scribe a copy for myself. Amelia, how much paper do we have left lying around?" Before her maid could reply, Lady Shiltier's hand disappeared into a hole in the air again, withdrawing a stack of expensive-looking paper. "I have plenty to use," she said. "Feel free." She kept piling up more and more stacks of paper until Ludmilla thought there should be several thousand sheets towering on the table. Just how many platinum coins was this worth? Amelia circled around to start storing them away before they toppled over. Placing the first sheet over a hard writing surface, Ludmilla took pen in hand. "By the way, my lady," she asked, "is this your native language? I've never seen such script before." "It is," Lady Shiltier replied. "And if you do encounter it somewhere, you are to report your findings to me as soon as possible. Consider it a matter of utmost importance." "Is this language dangerous?" "Not in the way that you probably mean, but those who use it are. In all likelihood, your trying to fight such a person is about as futile as trying to fight me. Your best chance of survival would lie with us, though escaping such an individual is unlikely should you provoke them." There was a stern tone to her liege's voice, a hard edge bordering on hostility that she had never heard Lady Shiltier express before. "Understood, my lady," Ludmilla nodded. "Though I hope to never meet someone like that. I will avoid confrontation and report to you immediately if I do." As they settled down into translating Lady Shiltier's notes, Ludmilla could not help but marvel at her attention to detail. After several hours, they had only gotten a third of the way into them, the majority of what was completed being a meticulous breakdown of characteristics and behaviors of the frost dragons. Everything from their natural habits, abilities and the known personality traits, performance and tendencies of each individual dragon under her management. From just the notes, she could understand why they were so suited to serve in their role as the core of the nation's aerial logistics. A frost dragon could cover vast distances through the air. A day's travel for a mundane and laden caravan in good conditions and paved roads would amount to less than an hour of unhurried flight. They never forgot what they experienced, making them ideal for navigating even the furthest reaches of the world. They would never get lost, as long as they had been there before. Very little in the world could catch one in the air, never mind defeat one, so security for cargo was similarly low on the list of concerns. "These frost dragons," Ludmilla said while stretching between sections of notes, "how did they come to join the Sorceress Kingdom?" "They were a bonus, I suppose," Lady Shiltier shrugged. "His Majesty was negotiating with the Dwarf Kingdom for various things and the topic of their old capital, Fioberkana, came up. I suppose that part had something to do with the dragons?" Lady Shiltier leaned forward, putting her elbows on the table and cupping her chin in her hands. "Yes," she replied. "The dwarves had one of their other cities destroyed by a clash between two frost dragons, and the dragons that ended up joining us were the ones that had turned Fioberkana into their lair." How did it go again?" "We broke a siege by the Quagga on the final dwarf stronghold, then one thing led to another and His Majesty promised to liberate Fioberkana in exchange for amicable trade relations, technical assistance and one of their ancestral crafts." "What about these Quagga you mentioned?" Ludmilla asked. "It sounds like the dwarf nation was at war with them." "You could say that they were rivals over the same territory," Lady Shiltier answered. "They're hairy, rodent-like demi-humans that stand around my own height. I guess if the frost dragons were a bonus, then the Quagga were a bonus of a bonus? They were servants of the frost dragons, so after the frost dragon leader was defeated the Quagga were given the option to submit or die." "What happened to them?" "They asked for us to prove our strength, so they died for a while. Then they submitted. Those who remained after everything was said and done were transported away, along with their intact dead." I wonder what that shorty did with the rest of their pieces. She had better still not be carrying it all around with her, that would take forever to air out." "Ah, I guess they were that sort of demi-human then." "That sort? What do you mean?" "I mentioned something along those lines earlier. I think, Ludmilla said. Many demi-humans will only negotiate if they respect the other side's strength, so something like a skirmish or contest to prove this is often required before they are willing to resort to diplomacy.
Ah, that you did, Lady Shiltia nodded. Yes, that's precisely what happened.
As expected of someone accustomed to dealing with demi-humans. I'm glad I managed to get things right, finally. Her voice trailed off, and Lady Shiltia sat silently in her seat. Ludmilla straightened in alarm as her liege's lips started to tremble, and tears gathered in her shining crimson eyes. Rising from her chair, Ludmilla circled around the table as she fished a handkerchief from a pocket. She lowered herself down beside Lady Shiltia, offering the folded linen cloth to her. At first, Lady Shiltia looked down at it wordlessly, trying to contain her emotions. Then a tear escaped and she quickly took the handkerchief to catch it. She stared at the damp spot on the cloth for a moment before her composure collapsed completely. Ludmilla laid her hand soothingly between Lady Shiltia's shuddering shoulders as she sobbed quietly into the handkerchief. I'm so glad, she said in a muffled voice. Lord Einstsch. Ludmilla remained beside her, and Lady Shiltia sniffed loudly. I should stop, she sniffed again, trying to regain control of herself. He said I can't waste my face on tears. Tears of happiness are not a waste, my lady, Ludmilla said gently. Lady Shiltia's sobs started anew. A long while later, Lady Shiltia finally settled down and Ludmilla returned to her seat after helping to fix up her appearance again. Her liege blew her nose into the handkerchief and looked back down at the sheets on the table. The Quagua, demi-humans, she murmured between sniffles, that reminds me, Cocytus wanted to speak to you about something. Lord Cocytus. I'm surprised he would mention me at all. Well, Lady Shiltia sniffed again, he's been aware of your existence for as long as I have, and your name has come up several times since. Though he is a man of few words, it does seem like he has some sort of request for you. Ludmilla set the pen down on the untouched page in front of her. Should we see to this immediately? She asked. How long has it been since he asked? It's not an urgent matter, Lady Shiltia answered. He's busy with security arrangements for the events in the capital at the moment anyways. We'll arrange a visit in advance at some point. For now, let's continue with these notes. Beyond the documentation of the frost dragons and their characteristics, Lady Shiltia's notes consisted of a variety of ideas and concepts that she had come up with regarding how the frost dragons could be utilized and how the transportation network would work. As a result, their progress slowed down considerably since Ludmilla needed to often expand on their ongoing transcription to understand what her liege was attempting to convey. While the idea of air transport was something she had grasped on a minor level with the bone vultures, many other things, such as ideas revolving around magic and magical items, were far outside of her personal experience. Are these items so readily available for purchase? She stopped to ask at one point. Even one such as myself understands the implications of such items being used. Surely someone must have thought of something like this for other forms of transportation at some point, and the concept would have become widespread. There's no way I can think of that can compete with this aside from the spells that you use for transport. You could even use these items in conjunction with those spells and it would become even more ludicrous. We do, it's an everyday thing for us, Lady Shiltia answered. Also, when we went on our trip to the north, there was at least one dwarf that used a similar item to carry the ores that he was mining. He didn't appear to be a well-off fellow either, compared with some others we encountered later. All right, suppose we use these infinite haversacks that are described here, Ludmilla said. What prevents a frost dragon from strapping on any number of these, effectively allowing them to fly all over the place with the capacity of a large ship? Being able to fly does not make one immune to encumbrance, Lady Shiltia told her. The infinite haversacks do weigh enough on their own that the burdens of carrying multiples will add up. I've determined that 4 is the maximum that an average adult frost dragon can manage without affecting the consistency of their long-distance performance. They become larger and more powerful as they age, so an old or ancient frost dragon will be able to handle more. Then what if we put an infinite haversack inside of another infinite haversack? I wouldn't recommend that. The results would be unfortunate. All right, Ludmilla said. But the question still stands, are such items so freely available? Something like these infinite haversacks must be exorbitantly expensive, even if they were. The profits a merchant could garner from even a single wagon loaded with these would be enormous, and the demand for them equally so. Lady Shiltir was silent for a moment at the question, then her hand disappeared into the mysterious hole in the air again. After withdrawing a rolled vellum parchment, a small frown appeared on her face. "What's that?" Ludmilla asked. "It's a message scroll," Lady Shiltir replied. "When I use it, it casts a message spell which allows me to converse with a single target over long distances. I haven't had to use one before, so I'm just making sure that I remember what to do." The described function of the spell seemed conspicuously similar to Ludmilla's own ability. Had she been using magic all along? Are there limits to its use? Range and such? I haven't heard any reports of range limitations. It's used quite often over hundreds of kilometers. It can be interfered with, though. Oh. That sounded suspiciously like disappointment. It's just, well, it sounded like one of my own abilities, but the spell appears to be far superior by comparison. You have the ability to use message. Lady Shiltir eyed her curiously. I don't think it works the same way, Ludmilla said. I'm fairly certain it has to do with my command abilities. Clara and the others can do it as well, but what they do seems slightly different as far as we can tell. Going by my own experience, there doesn't seem to be a limitation on range, but distances beyond a few kilometers take a fair bit out of me. Hearing that message can contact others hundreds of kilometers away makes my own ability seem unremarkable. Well, if it's not the same thing, there must be other advantages. What else can you do with it? You mentioned that message reaches a single target, but this ability can be heard by multiple individuals if desired, as long as I know roughly where they are. It's the same ability that you witnessed me use when sending out the first batch of undead laborers ordered at the administrative office in the city. We've found some rather useful applications, but the range is very short in comparison to this spell you're using. Are you able to do it right now? It doesn't take any mana or components or anything special, does it? Just a little bit of concentration, next to nothing when we're this close. Ah, then give it a try. I want to hear. Hello, Lady Shiltir. Oh, I heard it. Lady Shiltir perked up in her seat. Okay, how do I reply? As far as I know, it's one way only, Ludmilla said. Oh. Lady Shiltir's voice fell in disappointment. Ludmilla tried thinking of some benefits to the ability. The four of us, Clara, Leanne, Florian and I, are able to freely communicate in complete silence as long as we are within range of one another and we know where each one of us is, Ludmilla said. Group conversations are also possible. It's unknown whether the other nobles here have learned how to harness this ability, but it doesn't seem to be the case. They are keeping it a well-guarded secret otherwise. Between ourselves, we've decided not to spread the knowledge of this ability outside of our own little circle. Do you know if it can be interfered with? Lady Shiltir asked, or if the communication can be intercepted? We have no way to find out, really. At the least, no one has been able to interfere with the ability, but it could simply mean that no one has cared to try. The idea that someone might be able to listen in on our discussions is unsettling, though at that point I suppose it would be no different than eavesdropping on a regular conversation. We should find out one of these days, Lady Shiltir said. This ability is quite intriguing. Your decision to keep it to yourselves is prudent as well. Lord Ines has expressed similar sentiments over what knowledge should be promoted, and what should be restricted. His Majesty is wise, Ludmilla agreed. Just the idea of this ability being utilized by corrupt nobles or those with harmful designs against us seems like it would be a nightmare to deal with. Lady Shiltir tapped the roll of vellum several times on the table. Then she took a deep breath and released it. Well, here I go, she said after resolving herself. Wish me luck. Good luck. Message. Lady Shiltir released the scroll, which unfurled itself and floated into the air between them before being consumed by azure flames. Raising a hand, she held it to an ear. After a moment, her look of concentration turned to one of success, and she smiled at Ludmilla while excitedly gesturing with her free hand. Ludmilla smiled back, and Lady Shiltir went through a range of expressions as she silently conversed with the recipient of the spell. It worked, Lady Shiltir said in relief as she lowered her hand. That was a good thing too. I only brought one to try out. Looking around the manor, Lady Shiltier's gaze settled on an open section of the hall near the manor entrance. "You won't mind if I bring them here, yes?" she asked. "My land is yours, but I don't mind if you trust them," Ludmilla answered. "Who is it?" "You've met them before, I'm sure you'll recognize them immediately." Stretching her hand towards the empty area, Lady Shiltier cast a spell. Gate. The familiar black portal opened in the hall and a familiar figure, clad in black plate armor, stepped into the manor. Ludmilla rose from her seat and turned to greet him. "Welcome back to Warden's Vale, Moman," she said with a warm smile. "I've never had the opportunity to express my gratitude for everything that you've done for me." "Umu," he replied as he stood before them. Ludmilla still did not know what it meant. The adamantite adventurer looked over her for a moment before walking over to pull out a chair and seat himself to her left. Ludmilla reseated herself as well, folding her hands over her lap. Moman's visored gaze continued to scrutinize her for a long while, and it took an active effort not to shift in her seat. Finally, a long sigh escaped from beneath his helm. "Is something the matter?" Lady Shiltier asked. "Ah, no," Moman said as Ludmilla continued to feel his intense gaze upon her. "If anything, being here in this home sets my mind at ease." "Huh?" Wow! Lady Shiltier's mouth slowly formed into a smile. Ludmilla felt warmth creeping up her neck and blooming over her cheeks. She turned her gaze away from the adventurer, and out of the corner of her vision she could see Amelia covering her mouth with both hands. Why now? It was an ambush against which she had been entirely unprepared. Lady Shiltier was sitting right across from her as well. If anything, shouldn't she be the one who would normally receive such compliments? The notion that he was paying more attention to her than Lady Shiltier sent several more fragments of Ludmilla's composure tumbling into the abyss. Fighting to wrest back her peace of mind, she couldn't quite look at him before she found a thread of reason to cling on to. "I am quite flattered," she struggled to force coherent words out of her mouth, "but I do not wish to come between you and Nobe." "Eh? You are a couple, yes? You two seem so close, so this must be the case. It is said that you came here from some faraway place, pursuing some great cause around the world together. I feel it quite romantic." Ludmilla did feel that it was quite romantic, something that one might only expect out of fanciful tales. The reliance and commitment in one another that would surely blossom into genuine love and respect over the course of their many trials. Perhaps the old saying is true, that all men are wolves. Though there is one thing I am curious about. She was finally able to turn back to face him. "Do you plan on settling down somewhere once you start a family together?" Moman planted his face in his gauntlet. It seemed like she had successfully fended him off. "Yes, that's right," Lady Shiltier added. "I had expected that Nobe would be with you. She would have surely loved to hear this." Moman jerked suddenly and went into a fit of coughing. Maybe it wasn't the first time Lady Shiltier had seen him attempt this. Ahem. He cleared his throat. Nobe is with the magic heater I mean. Nobe is at the exhibition set up by the Imperial Ministry of Magic in Rantel. We were about to start cataloguing the magic items they have on display there. You mentioned that you wanted to consult with me on the subject of magic items. Is that an office lady suit you're wearing? Moman finally turned his attention away from her to speak with Lady Shiltier, and Ludmilla stared down at her hands while she resettled herself. Eyeing the inert ring of mental fortitude on her finger, she wished that it would protect her from mind-affecting attacks of that nature as well. "Yes, it gives off just the right image for desk work, doesn't it?" Lady Shiltier replied. "Lady Zaradnik here arranged my hair, not bad, yes?" "More to the point," Moman said, "you two seem to have become quite close. Human noblewomen are trained to serve as handmaidens, and my vampire brides are all busy making preparations for the new transportation network. Which brings me to the reason I called. We wanted your feedback on the magical items I've proposed should be standard to each frost dragon for their transportation duties. Lady Zaradnik, show him what we were just talking about." "Yes, my lady," Ludmilla replied. Ludmilla looked up and reached over to pull an open folder filled with sheets of paper in front of her. Leafing through the pages, she withdrew the dozen which outlined the subject of their discussion. Placing them in front of Moman, they waited quietly as he scanned over the details. 2 infinite haversacks for juveniles, 4 for adults, 6 for old, 8 for elder and 12 for ancient dragons. Periapt of health, ring of sustenance, ring of regeneration, greater ring of fire resistance, 3 rings. The one Lord Ines gave to Aura had his own spectacles, so we started seeing what else they could wear. Barring body armor, it appears that they can equip nearly everything, including a band for their tails.
That's rather interesting, Moman said.
I follow the general idea so far. They won't get sick, you'll save on the costs of feeding them, they'll regenerate injuries that they might receive while on the job, and you're reinforcing them against their primary weakness.
Yes, this is the basic equipment I was thinking of to start off with, Lady Sheltier nodded.
The set should keep them working and prevent the most likely of maintenance issues. Lord Ines told Aura and Mare that they should rest and eat since they are still growing, so I've scheduled time for the dragons to do so as well to eventually improve our cargo capacity. They're free to hunt game in the Azalisia Mountains and the Great Forest of Tob.
What about these other pages?
They are optional equipment loadouts that I've been considering, though I am leaning towards providing message scrolls as part of the basic provisions just in case they encounter unforeseen events and emergencies that need to be relayed to us. They'll be able to report anything suspicious that they notice as they fly around as well.
Optional, huh? Moman murmured as he continued reading through.
Why do some of these look like you're equipping them for war instead of cargo shipments? That's just in case the Sorceress Kingdom becomes involved in some conflict. If the risks involved with their work increases or they are called in for some reason to fight or deliver our forces somewhere, then they should be suitably prepared, yes? Some of these suitable preparations would make some of these dragons you have capable of destroying small nations single-handedly. Perhaps you should stick to something simple for now. There is also the fact that they are dragons, so being inundated with so many items at once could trigger undesirable behaviors.
Is that so?
Then would it be possible to secure the first set of accessories for all of the dragons?
The infinite haversacks as well, of course.
I will ask around and find out whether it's possible or not, Moman replied. The Adventurer Guild has been clamoring for magic items as well, but the Ministry of Transportation would most likely take priority for practical reasons. The message scrolls are a prudent addition as well. I'm certain that there should be no problem with those.
Excellent, Lady Sheltier smiled brightly. Please let me know once you have a definitive answer for me.
Moman flipped through the pages quickly one last time before returning them to the table and rising from his seat. Ludmilla rose as well,
to see him away. I should get back to Eranthal, he said.
Nobbe is probably still waiting for me at the Imperial Ministry of Magic's exhibition.
I will send word once I have an answer for you, Minister.
Still, though, I had no idea that you had such an eye for coordinating magic items.
Well, I do have quite an expansive wardrobe of magical equipment, Lady Sheltier replied,
so this much should be natural, no? Though I suppose I found out how addictive it could be while I was figuring out what might best suit Lady Zaradnik. The hours simply seem to vanish when one has so many magic items to mix and match.
Indeed,
Moman chuckled. It is somewhat surprising that you would part so readily with your own precious possessions, however. Well, after seeing the others being so free-handed with their own subordinates, I decided that my own should not be so easily overshadowed. She has proven herself a faithful servant thus far, and much has changed since I claimed her as my vassal, don't you agree?
This is very true, in many ways.
Much has changed for the better since I first encountered her in this place. So what did you end up bestowing Baroness Zaradnik with? I've only been able to get her to take a ring so far. Lady Sheltier held up a hand in a helpless gesture. She is quite stubborn even after I told her that I considered such refusals foolish. As pragmatic as she usually is, like Cocytus, she believes that everything one receives from their liege must be earned through merit or come with some important duty. Though she is a noble, she also has that same, obstinate warrior spirit. Can you imagine what would happen if you put the two of them together? I do wonder how such a meeting would play out. Either they would hit it off spectacularly or they would barely say anything to one another at all. Speaking of which, you remember he was asking after you too? Yes, we'll be visiting him after he's seen to organizing his part in Eranthal's events. I see. Moman turned away from the table and walked out into the hall.
Well, I should be on my way, if you please.